Farm margins are starting to feel tighter again tonight as lower grain prices, expensive inputs, difficult weather, and financial strain continue putting pressure on producers across agriculture. This is Boots and Bushels, your daily look at the markets that feed America. The grain board leaned weaker yesterday after traders returned from the holiday weekend, cautious about demand, weather, and the overall direction of agriculture heading into summer. July corn closed at 457.5, down 5 3/4 cents. July soybeans closed at 11.86, down 10.5 cents. July Chicago wheat closed at 635.5, down 10 3/4 cents. That grain weakness is creating frustration because the cost side of agriculture still has not relaxed very much. Producers continue dealing with expensive machinery, elevated land cost, higher borrowing expenses, and input prices that remain historically difficult compared to the lower cost environment agriculture operated in several years ago. Fertilizer remains one of the biggest concerns tonight. Global fertilizer companies continue dealing with supply uncertainty, consolidation concerns, and high production expenses. Farmers remember very clearly how fast fertilizer prices explode higher during the last major rally, and many operations remain cautious about locking into future purchases too aggressively while margins stay tight. There's also skepticism surrounding how much future domestic production will realistically lower prices. Agriculture has heard promises about easing input costs before, but many producers feel like expenses across the industry rarely fall as quickly as they rise. Even if fertilizer availability improves, operations are still trying to manage elevated costs across fuel, machinery, labor, repairs, financing, and crop protection products. Washington remains another source of uncertainty tonight. The House moved forward with year-round E15 legislation, while broader farm bill negotiations continue moving slowly. Many agriculture groups are becoming frustrated with how long major policy questions are taking to resolve. Grain producers, ethanol plants, and livestock operations continue monitoring these discussions because fuel policy, conservation programs, biofuel demand, and regulatory decisions all affect long-term profitability across agriculture. Another issue gaining attention tonight involves Bayer and seed agreements. The Department of Justice says Bayer agreed to suspend several controversial provisions inside its seed contract for the next 7 years, following criticism from lawmakers and producer groups. Many farmers have spent years voicing concerns about rising seed costs, reduced flexibility, tighter restrictions, and the growing amount of influence major corporations hold over input decisions across agriculture. For many operations, seed costs have become another category where producers feel like they have fewer options and less negotiating power than they did years ago. Financial stress across farm country is becoming more visible. Minnesota reportedly led the nation in farm bankruptcies during the first quarter. That doesn't mean agriculture as a whole is collapsing, but it does reflect how difficult conditions have become for some operations trying to manage debt, cash flow, and tighter margins. Higher interest rates continue affecting nearly every major purchase inside agriculture right now. Whether producers are financing machinery, land, buildings, operating notes, or livestock expenses, borrowing costs remain far more expensive than they were during the lower rate environment many operations had grown accustomed to. Machinery costs also remain elevated. Many producers continue delaying upgrades, repairing older equipment longer, or postponing expansion plans because replacing equipment has become significantly more expensive than it was only a few years ago. Weather is adding more stress across several producer regions tonight. Repeated storms continue slowing fieldwork across parts of the Ohio Valley, Central Appalachians, the Delta, and portions of the Gulf Coast. Heavy rainfall, muddy conditions, delayed spraying windows, stalled hay work, and saturated fields are all becoming problems where storms continue tracking across the same areas. This pattern creates challenges beyond simply getting crops planted. Producers are monitoring nitrogen timing closely, trying to avoid compaction issues, managing replant concerns, and hoping fields dry long enough to keep operations moving efficiently. In some areas, repeated moisture is also beginning to raise concern about disease pressure and crop quality later in the season. Livestock operations are dealing with their own weather frustrations. Persistent mud, standing water, and humid conditions can stress cattle, reduce pasture quality, complicate feeding conditions, and increase hoof and health concerns where rainfall remains excessive. Other regions continue facing the opposite problem. Parts of the western plains and high plains remain under drought pressure, especially across grazing country and dryland crop areas where moisture deficits continue hurting forage growth and limiting yield potential. One part of the country is struggling with excessive rainfall, while another continues needing moisture badly enough to create concern moving deeper into summer. Regional crop damage is also beginning to appear in isolated areas. Pennsylvania fruit growers are dealing with freeze damage after late cold weather impacted orchards and vineyards. Parts of Wisconsin are seeing dry conditions and alfalfa weevil pressure reduce early hay production, creating another concern for forage supplies and livestock feed cost. Uneven weather, tighter margins, policy uncertainty, and elevated operating costs are creating an uneasy tone across agriculture right now. There isn't one giant collapse happening tonight. Instead, producers are trying to manage multiple smaller pressures while protecting margins and keeping operations moving forward. On the livestock side, futures softened slightly yesterday but remain historically elevated overall. June live cattle closed at $248.22, down $1.07. August feeder cattle closed at $349.45, down 40 cents. June lean hogs closed at $96.12, up 37 cents. Cattle prices remain historically strong, but traders continue debating how long this rally can maintain momentum if feed costs stay elevated, beef prices remain high for consumers, or broader economic weakness begins affecting demand later this year. Tight cattle supplies continue supporting the market, but there's also growing awareness that these price levels leave very little room for mistakes if outside economic pressure increases. Class 3 milk closed at $16.65, up 8 cents. Crude oil finished slightly higher, with July crude closing at $96.60, up 25 cents. Fuel and energy costs remain on the radar for producers already dealing with expensive operating conditions across agriculture. Cotton finished nearly unchanged, with July cotton at $77.37, down 5 points. So the board yesterday leaned defensive overall. Grain stayed under pressure, cattle softened slightly, while remaining historically expensive, and weather continues creating uneven conditions across producer areas heading toward June. That's Boots and Bushels for Wednesday, May 27th. I'll be back again tomorrow with more ag updates.